Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History channel on YouTube. We'll also have a page on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'm also part of the Unfiltered Historian team. Most of our videos are available as podcasts from wherever you get your podcasts from. So joining me today is historian, fellow reenactor and friend, Mark Wheatcroft. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, everyone.
So the Battle of Hastings in the year 1066, that is what we're going to be discussing today. Obviously the build up, because it is important. It's not just the Battle of Hastings, there is a big build up to it. So before we get into the year 1066, Mark, please explain Saxon England and obviously what it is like in England at this point in time in history, please.
So to fully understand the events of 1066 in England, you've got to take it out of the context that it's an isolated event that most people sort of see it as, and look at it in the wider situation of the 11th century, which actually becomes a succession crisis after succession crisis. And this is the end game, so to speak, of this succession crisis. And it starts because Edward the Confessor, the King of England, dies without an heir. Now, going right back, Edward the Confessor is born and is the son of Ethelred II and his wife Emma of Normandy. So this is really important because this is what's going to happen come the end, or important to what comes at the end. He's born about 1003. In 1013, though, Sweyn Forkbeard, because at this point in time, England is very split between the English factions and the Danish factions, Danish/Norwegian factions, Sweyn Forkbeard forces Ethelred and his family into exile before taking the crown of England. After the Battle of Hastings in 1016, Canute and Edmund Ironside, another of Ethelred's sons, agreed to split England into two. Not long after that, Edmund dies suddenly, perhaps mysteriously, and Canute is chosen to rule over all of England. Now, this is the same Canute as the famous Stopping the Tide Canute. He then marries Ethelred's widow Emma and has they would have two further sons, Harald Hardrada and Harthur Canute, both of whom would rule England as king. In 1044, Harthur Canute dies without an heir, and the crown passes back to the English succession line and to Edward the Confessor. During the time that Edward's been in exile, he's been living with his mother's family in Normandy, and was brought up as a kind of half-brother to Robert the Magnificent, who is William the Conqueror's father. So that's the hereditary link, family link to the Norman factions that we will come across later. So by 1065, Edward's health is failing. The people of England realise that, again, there's going to be this succession crisis. So Edward the Confessor married Edith Godwin in 1045. Now, she is the daughter of Godwin and the sister of both Harald and Tostig, both of whom we will meet later on in this whole saga. But they failed to produce an heir. Now, there's some questions as to why this happens. It is possibly believed that Edward, as his nickname will later come onto as being the Confessor, was so pious that actually he led a life of celibacy. There is actually another thought process, though, in that he hated Godwin and the Godwinsons, and he deliberately didn't have an heir so that line would not come to rule England. It does come to pass that they rule, but for a very, very short time, as we know. So with the looming succession crisis, there is one person actually within this whole succession piece that is that's often forgotten. And this is a young boy, and he's out in exile somewhere, but I think it was in Hungary at the time, called Edgar the Athlin. And he is the nephew of Edward the Confessor. So by modern hereditary right, he would be the next in line. However, the way succession works in what we call pre-conquest England, I'll come on to in a minute why Saxon England has kind of been removed now. So pre-conquest England is actually a election process rather than necessarily direct by hereditary right. And as we will see when we get on to talking about Harald Godwinson, this is how he manages to take the throne following the death of Edward the Confessor in December 1065.
Okay, so please explain Harald Godwinson in a little bit more detail, please.
Right, so Harald Godwinson is Earl of Essex. His father Godwin by 1065 has died. He's taken that title. Godwin, along with the rest of the Godwinsons, are the biggest, most powerful family in England. But in 1051, they were actually exiled by Edward the Confessor to Flanders. Reason being, when Edward the Confessor returns from Normandy, he brings a lot of Norman people with him. To some extent, Edward the Confessor is our first Norman king, rather than William, you could argue. So he brings a lot of people that he grew up with, who was around in the Norman courts with him. And the Godwins didn't like this. They were pro-English. They wanted the English people in. So they get exiled. Eventually, they force their way back. And when they force their way back in 1054, they're influential in this quite a big political coup at the time, which is the ousting of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Jimenez. He gets sent packing back to Normandy, and he's replaced by Stigand, who is going to be another quite important character we're going to come across quite a few times in this whole story. But when Robert Jimenez left, he took with him what they call the pallium, which is the robes given by the Pope. And so, again, we will come on to this later on as to why it's important, but he goes. So if we skip on then to 1065 and the beginning of the Hastings saga, shall we say, Harold is the largest landowner in England. He's the most powerful, prominent person after the king, possibly even stronger. And he's also the brother-in-law of the king, so he's right up there in the highest echelons of society. And as I discussed before, with the succession crisis looming and the way that succession is passed by the election from the Witan, which is the council of the most prominent earls, the senior thanes, etc. And so they decided, following the death of Edward the Confessor, that Edgar is too young, he's too weak, he's not the person for the job. And so they appoint Harold as king. They want an Englishman, basically, and he's what they think is the best choice. There's a couple of other bits that go along with this, though, is that there is this deathbed bequest from Edward to Harold. Now, this is one that's then shown in the Bayeux Tapestry, and it's mentioned in some of the Anglo-Saxon chronicles as well, but it's all a bit ambiguous as to what this bequest was. It's very like, it's kind of like, can you take care of her or something like that. It's not I want you to be king, like solid argument. So there's a couple of thought processes to what Edward might have meant other than just, I want you to be king. One is, I want you to take care of the country until the succession, which some people believe, especially if you read William of Poitiers' writings, that it's all agreed that it's going to be William's throne, and that Harold will just act kind of as a regent until William fully takes over. It could also mean that take care of your sister, because she's, especially if we go by a tapestry depiction of this event, Harold and Edith are the only two people in that room. So there's some others that kind of look like they're peering over the wall looking for a window or something like that, but realistically, we are looking at just those three individuals in there. So it's not like it's going to be particularly well witnessed.
Okay. So Harold is crowned on the 5th of January, 1066, the same day Edward the Confessor is buried.
Yes.
So talk us through that, please.
So, as I say, it's a very quick, sudden thing. Normally speaking, if you look at the previous Anglo-Saxon kingship, you inherit the crown, but in some cases it's sort of years afterwards that you're actually crowned. But this is obviously, it's very quick, it's very rushed. It has the look and the feel of what it is, and it's a power grab by the Wessex factions, the Godwin factions. You know, William's out in Normandy, it's done. But as I was saying before, he's crowned by Stigand, who's Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, even to this day, the Archbishop of Canterbury is the person who crowns king. There's only been 2 episodes in history where it's not the Archbishop of Canterbury that does the coronation, it's the Archbishop of York. One is, we'll come on to, William, and there's reasons behind William being crowned by the Archbishop of York and not by Stigand himself. And the other one is in the reign of Henry II, when he crowns his eldest son, Henry, who's known as the young king. He never actually becomes king because he dies, and then Richard the Lionheart actually eventually takes the crown from Henry II. But he uses the Archbishop of York at the time because he's in conflict and quarrel with Becket. So it's a political move. So it's always the Archbishop of Canterbury. So Stigand does it. He hasn't got the Pallium from Rome. So he hasn't technically got the Pope's authority, which means that it could be argued, and it is argued, especially if you go by Potier's writing. I'm going to talk a bit about him later on anyway, because there's a lot of issues with his writing, shall we say. But in terms of, he hasn't got the authority from the Pope, which means he hasn't got authority from God, which means basically this is not a sanctioned coronation. And so it is used by, will later be used by William as part of the reasoning behind the invasion.
Okay, so there are 2 other claimants to the English throne, and I'd like you to explain them. So the first one being Harald Hardrada. Please explain his claim to the English throne, please.
Yep, so his actual name is Harald Sigurdsson, not Hardrada. That's a nickname that comes later. He was born about 1015, so you're kind of getting them all around about the same age, etc. He was forced to flee Norway in his teens during an uprising, and he goes off throughout Europe, learning mercenary skills, becoming a Viking, shall we say, for want of a better word. When he returns to Norway, there's a bit of a civil war going on, and he uses those mercenary skills that he gains, first of all, to propel his nephew Magnus to the throne, but then after that, after Magnus's death, to actually claim the throne for himself. And he rules Norway with an iron fist, which leads to his nickname Hardrada, basically. But it wasn't, the first time it's actually mentioned with this name, it isn't until the 13th century, when Snorri Sturluson writes King Harold's saga in around about 1220, 1230-ish, something like that. So we're not sure whether or not it was actually a name ever used by him, or he was referred to in the 11th century and at the time of his life. His claim, though, however, comes back to Magnus, his nephew. And supposedly there was a deal struck between Magnus and Harald Hardrada, who is Edward the Confessor's stepbrother and was two kings above Edward the Confessor, that they would each be each other's heirs to the throne, thus making that Magnus's deal would then pass to Harald Hardrada.
Okay. So the other one is obviously the famous William of Normandy, William the Conqueror. Tell us more about him and the Normans, please.
So the Normans, this is the best bit. To begin with, we've got to go back even further in time to 911 and a treaty that was signed in France by the King of the Franks, Charles the Simple, and a Viking invader called Rollo at St. Clair-sur-Epte. And this treaty, Paris was being raided on quite a regular basis. And this is a little bit, if you watch the Viking TV series, it's not the most historically accurate, but there is a little bit of this going on in there. Certainly Rollo is not Ragnar's brother, That is one major thing. But in return, Paris is, and the Seine Valley is being raided by numerous bands of Vikings. So the Treaty of St. Clair-sur-Epte gives Rollo's band the area of land around the Seine estuary. And in return for this land, and also the hand in marriage of Charles the Simple's daughter Papa to Rollo, they agree to guard the Seine estuary from other Viking bands, which they do very well. And over the following centuries, the descendants of Rollo, either through conquest, but also through marriage as well, they're very adept at how they work the political landscape. The early Counts of Bordeaux, then to Dukes of Normandy as the land and the titles expand. So over the centuries, they conquer larger swathes of northeastern France, and they gain that title, the Duke of Normandy. And it's Edward the Confessor's mother, who is the daughter of one of these early dukes, and the sister of Robert the Magnificent, who is William's. That's not the sister of Robert the Magnificent, it's the aunt of Robert the Magnificent. And that's where, who is William's father, and that's where Edward the Confessor grows up. So he knows them all. He's got a very Norman outlook. And if you look at Westminster Abbey, which William the Confessor founds, it's the first Romanesque church in England. So one of the big things that the Normans bring in post-conquest is the Romanesque churches. That's already going up. So that's where I say that Edward the Confessor could be considered a Norman king. So anyway, back to William. So William is the illegitimate son of Robert the Magnificent, Duke of Normandy, and Herleva. Now, there's numerous descriptions of what she was. Some say she's a tanner's daughter, some say she was a steward's daughter. She was certainly within the Duke of Normandy household. And they have an illicit affair. And the night, there's a chronicler called Wace, writing in the 13th century, I think, 13th or 14th century. And he writes that the night that she conceived William, she had this dream. And the dream was that this giant oak tree would start growing out of her stomach. And that it would spread and spread, and the canopy of the oak tree will go over large swathes of Normandy and France. Normandy, France, and England. So there's a bit of a premonition as to what the son was going to do. But William was never able to shake off the stigma of his birth. The early nicknames for him was William the Bastard. So it stuck with him. And there's a famous account of when he's besieging one of the towns on the edge of Normandy, the Sim-Revolt, that they hung cowhides from the city walls to remind him of his origins, which William didn't take too kindly to. And once he captured the village, slaughtered all of the defendants. And so that gives you an idea of the kind of character that William is. He's brutal, and you will see this not only at Hastings, but in the period of the conquest post-Hastings. So William's father dies when he's still a child. William's became Duke, but he's under constant threat from various factions within Normandy who see that maybe they've got a better claimant to it, but they're stronger, they're more powerful. But William grows up very, 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 very fast. Luckily for William, prior to his father's passing, he nominates a number of guardians, and they will see the boy come of age and further on. And it all culminates really for William at the Battle of Hastings, and he gains the support of the King of France, beats the rebellion Normans, and that's him sealed. But also the other thing is that a lot of his inner circle, who we will come across through the Hastings campaign, are the sons of the guardians. So it's the people, what's the children he grew up with, but they're certainly all around him. So William Fitz-Osbern, who's one of his key lieutenants, is the son of Osborne the steward, who's looked after William until he's murdered. And his murder he sacrifices himself so William can get away. So he's very loyal. He's got these key lieutenants in place quite early on. He first appears in the record about the succession in 1054 when he visits England and Edward. And according to William of Poitiers, that William of Poitiers is William's private chaplain. So we know from, if you look at his writings in terms of his eyewitness accounts, they're probably about as bang on as you can get. He's right front and centre to all this. Where we have to be careful with William of Poitiers, though, is that as a writer of politics, shall we say, he is very one-sided. And so you do have to take some of the stuff he takes with a pinch of salt and think, maybe let's have a look at some of the other evidence around maybe the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, a few of the other bits. There's not, unfortunately, 11th century stuff, there's not too much that's come down to us that we can really dig in deep as to what's being said, what's being done. But you just have to be a little bit careful with his stuff. But he, at this visit with William and Edward, at the end of the visit, Edward takes him aside and says, "The crown is yours on my death." It is supposedly the moment that the crown, that the succession would pass to William upon his death. So that's the early part of William the Conqueror's life.
Okay, so can you just explain why England is so important to all three men at the time? Is it riches? Is it what's so important about England?
Yeah, so England is, it's not the England that a lot of people would think it probably was at the time. It's certainly not as separated from Europe as a lot of people think. I think that there's a lot of cross-channel connections. There's a lot of, especially a lot of North Sea connections. It's one of the most well-functioning states in 11th century Europe, though. It's well run, it's well taxed, it's good. But for two of them, it's about kingship. Harald Hardrada is a little bit different. He sees that it's supposedly right for him, but he's already a king of Norway. He just wants a bit more land. With Harald, he's the senior person in the country. He thinks it's right. It should be an Englishman. It's me. And then with William, it's a bit, he's Duke of Normandy, but as Duke of Normandy, he has to pay homage to the King of France. If he can be King of England, then they're on the same level. And Normandy is just an extension of England within France. And if you, not so much what we're going to be discussing on these two videos, but if you follow the Normandy line and then the later Angevin line, so the early Plantagenet kings, England is always the senior place within that empire, shall we say. It's a bit dubious as to whether or not you call it an empire, but yeah, if you're looking at different perspectives of land in different areas, then it's a good term to use. Certainly you wouldn't use today's definition of empire, wouldn't come anywhere close to what it becomes. But England is the big prize here for all three.
Okay. So during this period, how does a king actually get an army together in England?
So it goes back on this one. So to almost the Viking period. So you've really got three main elements to the English army. So first of all, you've got your thanes. So this is, you got your king, then you got your earls, then you got your thanes. So these are the landowners, the higher levels of society. And what these will do, so this, after the conquest, a lot of people talk about feudal system. Feudal system is kind of already there, in that you offer land as the king, or as the earls, you offer land to people, and in return you commit to giving them a certain amount of military service per year. A little bit kind of like the TA maybe, but And then those thanes will then subdivide their land to lower levels of society in return. So a thane will be told that they needed to bring, for example, 100 men should the army be called out. So he would then distribute some land to 100 men in return for that land. You've also next got the household. So this is the professional wing of the English army. It's the bodyguard, and it's this group that will be grouped around Harold at Senlac Ridge in the final showdown at Hastings. And then lastly, you've got the Fjord. So the Fjord is the lowest level of the army. It's the county levies. And this system goes back all the way back to Alfred the Great, possibly even before it. And they've always had the same kind of problem that during the summer months it's fine. They're all out, they all come out. Come September, October, harvest time, they all want to go home. So it's when Alfred was king, he made sure that the fjord was broken into three. So there was always 1/3 would be at home, so they could cultivate the harvest. It was a bit different because you had marauding Danes as well at the time, so there was sort of a bit of a home guard element as well, that you was there, you was protecting the local locations, but also you was able to do the jobs that was required. So that was that's the formation of the basic formation of the English army at this time.
Okay. So Harold, sorry, got myself confused there. Right, so there is another factor, and that is, and you have mentioned this guy's name, that is Harold's brother Tostig Godwinson. So please explain a little bit about this character. So
Tostig, he's Harold's younger brother. There's more brothers to come as the story goes on, but he's younger brother, and he was the Earl of Northumberland up until 1065. When I say Northumbria, it's not Northumberland as we know it today, it's north of the Humber. So you are looking from Hull upwards. So all Yorkshire, Northumberland, quite a large swathe of the north and west coast areas as well. And he's in dispute with quite a few people up there. They don't particularly like him. You know, it very much the same today with the north and southern rivalry, that this guy's from Wessex. We don't want him up here. He doesn't know anything about us. So Edward the Confessor then sends Harold north to mediate. And unexpectedly, Harold sides with the rebels. And Tostig is ousted. He's replaced by Morcar as Northumberland. His brother is Edwin, Earl of Mercia. And they are the grandchilds of Leofric and Lady the Diver of Coventry fame. And so he's banished, he goes into exile, he goes to Flanders. As we already heard, whenever there's any of the Godwins fall out and get exiled, they go to Flanders. It's a very pro-Godwin area in Europe. And here he manages to gain a fleet. And in 1066, early on, he starts launching some raids. He starts in Kent, up the east coast. Eventually, he finds himself up in Scotland with Malcolm, the King of the Scots. At some point that summer, and we don't really know when, he joins forces with Hardrada. And they start to plan what will become the northern invasion and the northern campaigns of 1066. The early part, and to some extent probably the crucial part, because if this part doesn't happen, then Hastings may have a different outcome.
Cool. So Harald Godwinson, let's move forward a little bit now. So he's expecting an invasion, isn't he, from France? And so he is actually on the Isle of Wight in anticipation for an expected invasion from across the Channel. But he has to stand down his army, doesn't he, due to harvest. Then on September the 1066, Harald Hardrada, as we just said, invades northern England with Tostig, 10,000 men, 300 longships. After standing down his army, though, Harold, he now has to scramble it back together to deal with the invasion in the north. What is Harald Hardrada's first main objective?
First main objective is York. York is the capital of Northern England. In medieval England, it's the second city. You've got to remember, this isn't like today, post-industrialisation. There's no Manchester, there's no Birmingham. There's the three big hitting cities in England. It's London, it's Canterbury, it's York. So that's his main target. The other big thing is what you have to think of to really understand it as well, to some extent, is landscape. So we're talking invasion by longships. We're talking rivers being the highways of the country. You know, the Humber, the Thames, the Trent, the Severn, these big rivers that flow from the seas deep into the countryside, that are navigable by these longships quite a long way up each river. And also the alluvial plains around these rivers are a lot wider, a lot marshier than they are today. So a lot of reclaimed land hadn't been reclaimed at that point. So these wetlands, they're much more significant in the country than they are today. And the Humber gives you access to the Ouse, which gives you access to York. And they first aim to capture York for two main reasons. First of all, Tostig is out of Northumberland, that's his lands, he wants them back. Also, for Hardrada, York still has a very Danish/Norwegian influence. You've only got to go to Jorvik Viking Centre to see what it was a Viking, shall we say, city of the time. And there's this hope that with both of them, that they have support, not only in York, but also in the surrounding countryside. So that's their key main element. Take the north, let them come up, see if you, and then beat them on the battlefield.
Okay. So the first major battle of this 1066 is the Battle of Fulford on the 20th of September 1066. So tell us a bit more about this battle, please, Mark.
Yeah, so Fulford is just outside of York. It's on the banks of the Ouse as you leave York. It's the forgotten battle. Not many people talk about it. The actual battlefield itself, you can't find it. I was up there a couple of weeks ago. I drove around for about half an hour trying to find where I thought it would, anywhere close to it being. It's been built on, basically. It is there. If you follow the road from the A64, the A19 into York, you go through Fulford, you will cross a battlefield. It's there somewhere. So what happens is that Edwin and Morcar, the Midlands there on the Northern Elf, shall we call them, scurry out the defences of York and engage Hardrada's forces, and they are beaten badly. And some people, it's kind of believed at some point that actually, is this battle important? And to all intents and purposes, not really, if you look at it in a strategic point of view. But when you look at what is to come, it is important, because should, say for example, Edwin and Morcar had sustained a victory, Lewis could reach Harold, he could turn around and he could be back down in the south when the Norman invasion occurs. Or when they come up, and they still fight at Stamford Bridge, which is going to happen a few days later, the numbers game plays out and they've got these extra men to fight. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to come down. The culminating factor at Hastings is they just run out of men. It's a battle of attrition, and whoever's got the most men standing at the end wins. So that's the importance of this battle. The rest of it could happen, it could not happen, and it wouldn't make much difference. But it's the fact that they are certainly beaten, they lose that many men, and they then struggle to come. They will eventually run out of men as these campaigns and battles keep coming forward.
Okay, so 5 days later, we have a major battle, and this is a major battle, and it is the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which is fought on the 25th of September 1066. So you just recently, like you said, you had your little trip up there. So a couple of these pictures you took, Mark.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so talk us through the Battle of Stamford Bridge, please.
So Battle of Stamford Bridge itself is a small little, was then a small little town. It still is quite small, it's gradually getting bigger. But its main thing is the bridge over the River Derwent on the old Roman road. And so what happens is that after Fulford, Hardrada and Tostig move back to Stamford, back to here. Probably you thinking that the Derwent is a bit of a protective barrier that they can defend because you've got to cross a bridge to get to it. It's quite easy to defend it. And they are awaiting the leaders of York to come out and submit the city to them. But what happens is instead is that they are surprised because Harald has force marched the army from the south coast of York in 14 days. And so when they see the glint of the sun off of the helmets and the armour and the spear points of the English army advancing on them, they're in trouble because so relaxed was their attitude that they'd beaten Edwin and Morcar at Fulford, and they are looking at receiving the surrender of York. They've left all their armour on their longships in the Humber. So they're not prepared for battle, and the English have just gained complete surprise on them.
Okay, I want to ask you about a story I heard about a lone Norwegian warrior that held the bridge and stopped pretty much the whole English army for a little while.
Yeah, so this is a 12th century account. So did it happen, didn't it? Is a bit hard to say. And that's this lone warrior on the bridge on his own with a double-handed battle axe. It's another bridge, so he could defend it because you would have to bring on, it'd be single combat on this bridge. So it is effectively possible. And according to this legend, eventually it's overcome because one of the English soldiers gets in a barrel, they float him under the bridge, and he sticks his spear point up into the nether regions.
Oh, yeah.
and that's what opens it up, and the battle really can commence. Did it happen or didn't it? It's hard to say. You're looking at a chronicle written a century later. None of the 11th century stuff talk about it. And when you look at the outcome of the actual battle itself, if they're held up for a significant period of time by one person, you'd think that maybe that they'd be in a better position for when the eventual attack comes. So I think that the actual shock and surprise that they were there leads me to believe that it probably didn't happen, and that it's more likely they just get completely overrun because the English army just advanced on them so quick.
Okay. One thing that definitely happened is Harald Hardrada is killed in this battle. So talk us through that, please.
Yeah, so once across the bridge, through the town, at the other side, the large panoramic picture there shows the area that is known as the Battle Flat. So not 100% sure where the battle took place on there, but it's there somewhere again. And we don't know too much about it. We know, like, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us that it's a long battle with rivers of blood, and that Tostig and Harald Hardrada fall. But unlike Hastings, which we're going to come on to later, we don't have this blow, blah, blah account of where people were, what happened. What we can presume is that you're looking at a shield wall battle. To begin with, first of all, one of the most important factors is the English had archers. You know, at Hastings, we'll come on to, they're not there. At Stamford Bridge, they are. And with the lack of armour that the Danes and Norwegians had, it allowed the English to really practice long-range killing and start decimating the numbers further out. Eventually, the shield walls, the overlapped shields formed into a wall, striking above. They come into contact, they clash. And what we do know is that of the army that arrived, 300 longships, it takes 24 to take them home. So it is an annihilation of the Hardrada Tostig army is wiped out. Hardrada's killed. Prior to the battle, actually, Harold sends an envoy to the enemy camp to offer terms. His terms are that he will give Hardrada back his land. So I think Hardrada, not Hardrada, Tostig back his land, and I think Tostig probably would have taken this. What he offers Hardrada is something slightly different, and that's 7 foot of English land. Basically, it's enough for his grave. You know, even if he submits and surrenders, he's going to kill him. So he obviously doesn't take it, and he's slaughtered in battle. I'd say 300 ships bring him, 24 take him home. That gives you an idea of the devastation caused by Harold's army. We don't know numbers of how many are killed on Harold's side. We can presume quite a lot because of the style of fighting at the time. You would expect it to be not similar, but close-ish, I would say. And again, that's going to become a major factor for Hastings. So it is this thing of almost whoever fights the single battle will win the conflict.
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't know that about the ships. Anyway, so let's move on to William, because at this point, William is obviously planning. So when does his planning start? And I understand, obviously, there's a couple of aborted attempts due to weather conditions and, of course, other circumstances. So talk us through that, please, mate.
Yeah. So William's plans pretty much start straight away. You know, to say he's annoyed is an understatement when he finds out that when the news comes over that Harold's been given the crown. And so, but first of all, he needs support. And the first one is his knights. So his knights, similar to the English thanes, are given land in return for military servitude. But there's a key factor here, and that factor is that servitude is for defence. There's nothing about it to say about aggression, and certainly not to launch an invasion across the channel. So first of all, you have to bring them all together, and they pretty much unanimously agree that they're going to go. The reason being is offering more chunks of land, so they're going to get rich. And maybe it's that old Viking element in them that goes, there's a chance to go raiding and plundering. Probably not. They are more civilized than they used to be in that sense, but they're going to get rich. So that's why they go. The next one after the council is to get the support of the Pope. And he does this by sending his friend Lanfranc, who is the abbot of St. Stephen's in Caen. He's going to come up post 1070. He becomes Archbishop of Canterbury, where most people in English, studying English history, will be aware of him from. But he goes to the Pope and puts William's claim. Obviously, there's a couple of religious connotations to this. So first of all, we go back to the coronation. Stigand, without the pallium, without the Pope's authority, without God's authority, has anointed and crowned an English king. That's a usurper. But you've also got, which we haven't come across yet, is in 1064, there is this trip by Harold to Normandy. It's on the Bayeux Tapestry. It does happen, we know that. What we don't know is why he went. The Bayeux Tapestry, commissioned by William's half-brother Odo after the event, suggests that he was all sent on the orders of Edward. It's also been suggested that Harold had relatives that was being held hostage by William, and he went to secure the release. Another reason is that they were on a fishing trip and got blown across the channel. For whatever reason he went, he gets shipwrecked in a nearby area of France. And when William hears who has been shipwrecked and is taken prisoner by the local count, he goes and rescues him. And for a while, they get on okay. Harold goes on campaign against Bretons in Dole at the siege or crossing the river by Mont Saint Michel. He goes into the river to rescue a couple of William's drowning knights, and he's actually knighted by William. Now, this means that he has to pay homage to him. So it has, again, some of these underlying medieval connotations that we have to understand. But at the end of the trip, Harold is supposedly swears an oath that he will honour William's claim to the throne on holy relics. And this is the big evidence that Lanfranc takes to the Pope. And in return, he is given the Pope's blessing for the invasion and the papal banner, which they will bring into the battle. So that's the port side. So then what you get is the planning and the building, all the ships, the armadas getting ready, and so you're now expecting the crossing any day, and it keeps getting delayed. Now, a lot of the writings talk about the weather, that it's blowing, the winds are blowing the wrong direction, and that the army where it's gathered is almost on the verge of starvation. It's almost at the point that William's got to send it home. Now, when they do eventually cross, it takes less than a night to cross. And I can't see how the wind would not blow in that one direction for enough time for that army to cross, if they can cross that quickly. So I wonder if William's got something else in mind. Is he waiting for, does he know that the harvest is going, that the army is going to be disbanded for the harvest, and then that's the time to strike? Does he know that Hardrada's preparing an invasion force as well, and that he's thinking, you know what, if I fight one battle, I'll win. So I let them duke it out up north, and then, but if that is the case, then why does he bring the army together that early? So they're at a place called St. Valery-sur-Somme, and William is now desperate to get across. I think if he's looking at it and thinking, if I don't get, it's late September, if I don't get across soon, I've got to disband the army and they've got to come back next year. So they get the relics of St. Valery out, and they do this big parade through the town, and miraculously the wind changes overnight and they set sail. And that's them leaving France. The next morning they're in England.
Okay, so how big is the invasion force, Mark?
Right, so luckily we have a tiny little bit of paper evidence called the ship's list that's survived from the 11th century, which can tell us an idea of how big it is. It gives the names of all the big Norman magnates. So the ship that's gifted to William by Matilda, his wife, William Fitzosborne, Odo of Bayeux, Robert Count of Mortain, they're all on there, and it's how many ships and how many soldiers they will provide per magnate. And it's a little, there's some ambiguity there, because if you total all the ships up, it comes to 776. But if you look at the final sentence, it goes, yeah, 1,000 ships. Wace, writing a century later, says 696. So there's no way of actually knowing, but I reckon if we guesstimate around about 800 ships, it will be a good idea of the size. In terms of soldiers, you're looking around about 4,000, 4,500. But when we're looking at the ships, bearing in mind, comparing it to, say, Hardrada's force that had 300 ships, Hardrada's force is an infantry force. What's coming from Normandy is what I would call a mixed arms force, and it's the first time this mixed arms force appears in England, and that's one of archers, of infantry, and most importantly of cavalry. And obviously the cavalry coming over, it's going to take more ships because you can't get as many horses on a boat as you can men. So yeah, it for an army of the time, it's a big invasion force that's coming.
So if you witness this, it's going to be wow, isn't it? You know, if you're standing on the coast, you see them coming towards you, it's going to be, yeah.
Yeah, this, as scary as that first Viking raid was up on Lindisfarne in 1798, this is a whole different matter, a whole different ball game that's coming. You know, you probably won't see as many ships cross that section of channel until 1944 when they go the
Yeah,
other direction.
yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah,
That's
really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so on the 27th of September, as you've already said, he sets off, and on the 28th of September, in the morning of the 28th, William of Normandy lands at Pevensey Bay in East Sussex. And at this point, obviously, Harold is and the English army are up in Yorkshire. They've just fought the Battle of Stamford Bridge a few days ago. Please explain how the invasion affects the people of East Sussex and the local area, you know?
Yeah, so first of all, William lands in the Pevensey marshes. So the picture you got of Pevensey there, the landscape is a lot different. If you've been to Pevensey and you know where the castle is, you know there's that flat area of land just outside the castle where the main road comes in. That's all flooded out. That's alluvial plains. And the Roman fort in which the castle is later built, the first castle, is on the peninsula between the sea and the marsh. So they land there and they occupy the old Roman shore fort, and they build a modern castle within a corner of the walls of the old Roman fort. And this is something you're going to see time and time again as the conquest goes on, this recycling of Roman fortified places. And so he takes Pevensey, he does that. He then splits his forces into two. Some go by land, some go by sea, and they go and capture Hastings, because Hastings, it then isn't the quaint little seaside town it is now. It's quite a major port. And so they go and take that. So because he's got to secure his line of communications back to France, back to Normandy. And then he sends out the troops out to harry the local land. A couple of reasons why. They haven't brought all the food supplies and everything with them. They're going to live off the land. Secondly, Sussex is Harold's manor. His home's just down the coast in Bosham, not far from Cirencester. And he's provoking him. He's going out, they're living off the land, they're burning cottages, burning villages. It's come on, where are you? We want you down here, we want to fight. So then Harold receives the news of William's invasion whilst he's still in York. It returned into the aftermath of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, including burying Tostig, we believe, in York Minster. So upon hearing the news, Harold sets off immediately, races back to London along with his housecarls and the senior thanes. Now, so they're travelling by horse, and are probably, not only are they travelling by horse, but it's horse relays. So there's horses stationed along the route of the Great North Road, pretty much running along the line to the current A1. So you can ride at a fast pace, because you ride that horse for, say, 20 miles, then you jump off, you get on another one. So you haven't got to wait for the horse to repair and recover. So they're coming down very fast. The problem you've got with this is that the rest of the army is absolutely strung out behind it. And what you will, and most importantly, the archers. They're part of that field. They're the county levies. They're not the professionals. They haven't got the soldiers. They haven't got the horses. They're left behind. And so Harold eventually arrives back into London. And when he gets to London, his mother says that, wait, let the army come down, regroup, rest, then go. But because of what's happening down there in Sussex, Harold's adamant, I'm going. So he races through and goes down to the Hastings area, shall we say, and is preparing to fight. And the end game is here.
And again, so that sets up the Battle of Hastings. So thanks for explaining all that, Mark. Look out for episode 2, everybody, because we will focus on just the battle itself. And I hope you'll join us all again. So, Mark, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. See you again soon.
No problem. See you soon. Bye-bye.